Managers are going to be a key part of the revolution if and when it happens. But at the same time, right now, they're going to be the ones that we're going to have the hardest time reminding them of where their value actually comes from. And it's not your performance season bonus.
Stunned. Mic drop. That's it. That's it. Hey, I'm Lars Gallion.
And I'm Aparna. Welcome to the Circle Back Club, a podcast for white-collar workers who suspect that the problem isn't us. We are here to reimagine and rebuild workplaces to strengthen communities instead of depleting them, to see your coworker as your comrade, not your competition, and to stand up for the dignity and care of all humans and this beautiful planet together. Welcome to our second episode, everybody.
Welcome. And today we're going to start at the beginning, a beginning, to make sense of why corporate work is the way that it is today. We've all signed this social contract, a way of speaking, producing, relating to each other. And while it is mostly entertaining to make fun of, we literally named our podcast the Circle Back Club for that reason. We also know that when workers are rooted in our history, we can make really room to envision and remember that there are other ways for us to be working. So today we're going to dip our toes in business history. We're going to explore this shift from entrepreneurial capitalism to managerial capitalism. We're going to talk about the shareholder primacy doctrine. Yes, that is real. And we're going to talk about how this honestly relatively recent shift to quarterly / exponential growth business model has impacted the corporate worker today, which, spoiler alert, guess when burnout was first introduced into the world? Dun, dun, dun.
I imagine it wasn't the 1920s. But I also feel like this is the moment that maybe we should ask listeners to grab something to write with, because I have a feeling that they might have to take some notes. Just a thought.
We're going to get nerdy. And just enough, hopefully you just get so excited that you start obsessing white-collar business history with us too.
Amazing.
And we are so lucky to be joined by our friend, Bachul Koul. And honestly, it's not a club unless we're hanging out together. So that's what we're up to. We're going to be hanging, we're going to be storytelling. And Bachul is someone who considers himself a very non-traditional human who has worked exclusively in very traditional spaces. And they're currently offering selective advisory services, but really focusing most of their time on social justice and mental health. So appreciate all you do for us, Bachul, and thanks for being with us.
Thank you. Thanks for having me today. Yeah, this is a topic that is very near and dear to my heart after spending, the last 25 years plus in the white collar corporate world. So I'm looking forward to getting into it.
Bachul, you're not just white collar and traditional. Like, you have spent a lot of your career specifically in finance, right?
Yes. Yeah, I have. And it's interesting. So when I say I'm a non-traditional human in very traditional spaces, I am an immigrant to this country. We came from India. And so neither of my parents came up in the United States. They didn't know what it was to, go to college and build a career and do whatever. And so, but all I knew was the immigrant value of, okay, we brought you here. Now you need to do better than we did. And so, you're kind of told there's a few avenues: doctor, lawyer, engineer. And then there is this whole world of sort of finance, which has so many different aspects to it. And so, yeah, I kind of muddled my way through. After college, I worked in the sort of investment banking finance space, but on the legal side. And then I worked for another very large national bank. then I was in management consulting for about a decade. And then most recently, I was working in private equity. So hopefully can bring a lot of different and sort of unique stories to the fold today. But yeah, now in this sort of new phase of my career, I am taking a moment to take a step back and really think about how we got here, and what future I'd like to see. All the juniors that I left in the workforce now, when I took a step out, I have hope that they can be a different type of leader for a different type of tomorrow. But, a lot of, I have hope. I'm an eternal optimist.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Yes, please.
Yeah.
Hope. We share that hope,
Yeah.
which is really the point of this, is like, how can we get that back? So yeah, and it sounds like you will know a lot about the way money moves, which we're going to talk about that a little bit today. And because we're getting into some history storytelling, I thought it'd be fun to ask you two, what's your favorite history to learn? Aparna, what do you like to learn about?
Okay, well, I like to learn about many things, and I don't want anybody judging me, but I'm really into historical fiction specifically. I got into a little bit of smut last year, and when I was on my sabbatical, and I discovered the series called Outlander, which I'm probably late to the game on this show, but yeah, Scottish men, 17th century Scotsmen. That's my jam.
That's the history you want to know about.
That is the history I want to know about.
Yeah, that's the history you don't want us to forget, right? We got to hang on to that history.
Kilts,
Bring it back.
Kilts.
Bring it back. Yeah, bring back the kilts. Yeah, but I'm just blushing now. Like people have to cut this portion out where I'm blushing.
So worth it. What about you, Bachul?
Well, I wish mine was as fun and lighthearted, but I'll be 46 this year, and with everything that's going on, I've been kind of going back and rechecking the history that I was taught in school after discovering, and I didn't know this, but each state gets to review and edit the history textbooks that are taught in their classrooms. And so, like Hidden Figures was a great example. And that movie came out. I don't know about you guys. I had no idea. I'd never heard of those women before, So I'm going back and I'm trying to connect with different knowledge sources to learn about like the actual true history of not just the US, but also of where I come from, of Europe, of really, peeling the onion back. So that's what I'm into, maybe like a restorative justice view of history.
Beautiful. Beautiful.
What's yours, Lars?
Mine is the history of jazz in the US. I've found that spending time with these artists who are truly just prolific is my favorite way to also learn the racialized history of the country. Jazz and that history are so intimately intertwined with each other. And I think in many ways is why that music remains to be so special, because it was created when the stakes were so high to survive. And of course, they still are today, but there's something so literally dire around making music during that time. And it was also the birth of the hipster. Like the original hipster came from white people with money who were enamored by these jazz artists who were living in absolute poverty, making money in tiny, tiny increments. And I lived in New York in my 20s. I probably was that guy a little bit. So I like to know that history too. And I think it's probably why our music is a little jazzy. I don't know, Aparna, if you think I've influenced that at all.
I think we're going to need you to provide a live sample right now.
Oh, just a little scoobity bop bop dabba dib bow.
Okay.
Please edit that out. Okay.
Wait, line. We'll add though. That time in the Harlem Renaissance was actually a really incredible time for trans people too. So there was a lot of
Yeah.
there were a lot of butch. It was I think I read it in Stone Butch Blue, but there were a lot of butch lesbians that would dress up as men. But then there were also trans men that were kind of living in this world as men, and everybody knew in it, but it was okay. So I love that. I think you're right. The history of jazz is so much more than just a history of music.
Yes, that's so cool.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, shall we get into some business history?
Nothing has made me more excited all week
Yeah.
than this.
So, obviously, as I shared, we're doing this so we can really ground in where we are today, why we are the way we are today. And business anthropology was actually what set the trajectory of my career, which was 15 years in DEI, turned leadership development facilitator and somatic coach, which I'm sure we will be processing this in lots of ways during our time together. But I was really captivated by the story of capitalism, caring about why things are the way they are and what we could do about it. So really similar to you, Bachul, just wanting to understand that. And DEI at the time felt like the most viable place to do that work. So before we get into it, I do want to name in general with this podcast and in life, it's best to have people who directly studied the thing we're talking about to tell that story, to educate us. And today we're going to draw from a business historian named Alfred Chandler Jr., who was on this earth from 1918 to 2007, and an economist named Milton Friedman, who did his thing, which was quite the thing, from 1912 to 2006. So just as a listener, remember, just because I'm the one talking doesn't mean I'm an expert. That in itself is actually kind of a prevalent I don't know, social contract in corporations. I feel like we often see the person who has the ability to hire or fire us to just have inherently more knowledge than we do. I don't know, or even worse, we pretend that they do to keep our sense of job security. Like we perform that. I don't know. Have you two done that before with the manager? I definitely have.
Oh my gosh. I think coming out of graduate school, I had a series of managers that had zero lived experience whatsoever working in immigrant and refugee communities. And I was leading a lot of like STEM programming. And I just, yeah, like my boss would say and do things. And I had to really learn to keep my mouth shut and not correct her. But I do like over the course of, the last 20 years, I often come back to how much we are forced to perform. And the thing that I remember about this particular boss is that she never could get herself to say, I just don't know. You know, I don't know, or I don't know where to learn about and
Yeah.
right, like cultural behaviors or habits of young people that were coming from Somalia or Eritrea or Cambodia. She just pretended. She just pretended.
That that sounds just like a much more serious case than the sort of more corporate examples that I've seen. But the sort of prevailing way to measure people is performance management. And I can go off for another 8 days on how much I hate performance management. But when when we get into this and we get into the history of work and Lars, where we're going with the conversation, I think you'll start to see the sort of red thread that goes through all of this. But no, if you look at the workforce, and this is where I spend the bulk of my work doing, is helping take strategy and translate it into an operating model. So not only the what are we trying to do, but the how are we going to do it and who do we need to get it done. And I think what I've been most surprised about over the years is just like they really have no clue. They have no clue what they want or how to get there. They just know they need all of these people to be doing all of these things. And And so when it comes to performance management, you've actually incentivized all of these people to, as you said, compete with one another for like the one, ring that's hanging their old way around in the circle to catch. And so I'm sure we'll get into it, but there's so many. I think the one phrase you're going to hear from me a lot today is probably systems and structures. Systems and structures.
Bachul, we are going to gift you a copy of Bullshit Jobs by David Graeber.
Yeah.
Yeah, you need that one.
Okay.
Yeah, it's the performance of it. And I think everything you two just said you're going to find it in the history of why managers are afraid to say they don't know, what that disempowerment looks like, what it's rooted in. And then also, to your point, systems and structures, the responsibility of the manager to figure all of that out and use that knowledge as their security for work. So, long example to say, hey, everyone, here we are. I'm going to say things. It doesn't credential me. Stay curious, stay questioning, and I do hope to provide some solid history for us. And so let's start with a question. When I say worker history, what do you two think about? What comes to mind for you?
It's so funny because something very clear comes to mind. When you say worker history, I think we're about to learn about what hurdles and obstacles people have had to overcome in order to work and live. That's what I think about work. For me, worker history is basically all the stories of heroism from the front lines, fighting for safety, fighting for rights, fighting for your pay. That's what pops to mind.
I don't know why, but today when I am thinking about worker history, I really think of agricultural workers. I've been thinking about agricultural workers a lot, and especially as we're starting to get into warmer months, one of the things that I've started paying attention to, especially here in the Pacific Northwest, where we traditionally haven't had very hot summers, is the agricultural workers that die because of the heat. And already this year, right? Like, Lars, when we got on today, you were like, "Oh, it's really warm today." Like, right? And so that's what I think of. Like, I think about the people that are growing our food and the conditions that they exist under.
Oof. For me, I think about, honestly, like the coal mines. I go to history, which I have been listening to the Working Class History podcast, specifically the series on bootleg miners. So I am a little biased, but I think that's where I ultimately go, is unions always. And I think both of you have weaved that in really beautifully, of like, what is our relationship to work? And then also, what are we doing about it? And I was recently at a gathering of tech workers who are organizing around their company's involvement uh, in the genocide of Palestinians. And the organizers from the Tech Workers Coalition, shout out to TWC, hope to have you with us on this show soon. And I think we should link to them in the show notes in case there are folks in tech who want to get involved in some organizing but don't know where to start. Great organization. And one of the things TWC said was that when people come to them, they don't even think of themselves as a worker or have used that terminology. And I think that kind of dissonance has a real impact on your understanding that you, to both of your points, that you are a participant in this contract that can be changed. And I've definitely felt that. And so when I think of worker history, similar to you two, I'm thinking about the ways that workers have changed history. And one of the challenges of white collar work is we are taught to think of it as a neutral zone, a apolitical space. And when in reality, yeah, we can change it. And this history is new, it's recent. And when we can contextualize that and take action against it, that's when things become politicized. That's when we're actually able to anchor in, this is what I care about, and I'm going to move towards this with people together. So it's important that if we are trying to reimagine white collar work, create new systems of interdependency that don't solely rely on our employer to hold the keys of our sense of dignity, safety, care, belonging, you name it. If we want to learn skills to show our company that we are watching, that we care about and take action for our coworkers' well-being, and that we care about the harm our companies make to the planet and to people's lives that are a neighborhood or a continent away, we need to know our history. So you two kind of are getting into this already, but I'm curious if you were to guess, why do you think managers are so important to this story?
Well, I would say that somebody needs to get paid to liaise between the people doing the work and the people profiting off of that work.
Yeah, I agree 100% with that. I'd also say that we'll come back to this, but they call it the frozen middle, right? And you have at the top all of the people who have already been paid very well and are still getting paid very well, just kind of bouncing around. And then you have all the people who are trying to get paid very well. And if they hit this frozen middle, they hit it, it doesn't work, they bounce back. It's only the people who let themselves get absorbed into the ice block and become part of the frozen middle that are able to get there, you know? So I think managers are going to be a key part of the revolution if and when it happens.
Ooh.
But at the same time, right now, they're going to be the ones that we're going to have the hardest time reminding them of where their value actually comes from. And it's not your performance season bonus.
Whoa.
Stunned. Mic drop. That's it. That's it. Okay, we're going to put those insights into our pockets, and we're going to talk about a business historian named Alfred Chandler Jr., who really was the guy who made being a business historian something that was recognizable, particularly in our understanding of documenting the way that modern corporations work. He won a Pulitzer Prize for this book that he wrote in 1977 called The Visible Hand, The Managerial Revolution in American Business. And it's all about this charting of how we moved from entrepreneurial to managerial capitalism. And the language of visible hand is a counter to Adam Smith, who is known as the father of economics or capitalism. So we're going to call him Daddy No Cap today because that's who he is. And he famously wrote about the invisible hand 200 years prior in 1776 that in a very simplified way said that people pursue their own economic interests, and that self-interest inherently improves their living condition, so thereby advances society. So basically, let people pursue their self-interest, keep things decentralized, and it's going to work out for all people. We're going to create competition, consumer choice, innovation, all that good stuff. But as we know, people's ethics, monopolies, yikes, get in the way of that vision. So in Daddy No Cap's view, though, self-interest is not excessive greed. There are ethical boundaries to it. He was, pro-regulation and government involvement. But if we talk about Alfred, our guy who's saying the hand is visible, his pitch was no, the hand of modern business is very visible. And it is the hand of the professional managerial class, the grand and profitable coordinators of Lord Business. Have you all seen the Lego movie? Do we know this reference? Aparna's face says no. Okay, well, listeners, I hope you enjoyed that if you do. Anyways, so Alfred was following mostly manufacturing companies, and he was tracking from the 1850s to the 1930s that companies moved from coordination. So we're coordinating the railroads, which there's a lot to process there of who they were coordinating to build the railroads. But from coordination, we moved to mass production to finally mass distribution. So think about Sears Corporation, who paved the way for the Target business model today. Also, side note, in prep of this episode, I saw that there are only 5 Sears left across the country. Did you all? And they used to be like the equivalent of Amazon today. They were the company that allowed that level of convenience.
Yeah.
Have you all been to Sears or have like any Sears memories?
Yeah. The Sears catalog was like the catalog for Christmas gifts. Okay. Again, immigrants. We just did what everybody else was doing, but like it was a big deal. Sears, you would go to Sears to see Santa every
That's
year.
right.
Wild. I think I immigrated to the US a little too late to have visited a Sears, unfortunately, but I did visit J.C. Penney, another store that there might only be 5 left of.
J.C. Penney, we love your style. Never forget. Wasn't that the tagline?
Maybe.
I'm singing it in my head. Our producer can insert that. Free ad space for JCPenney. Anyways, so talking about our guy Alfred, essentially what he saw was because of the way that business developed, the core engine of capitalism went from entrepreneurial. So I'm a business owner who runs a not so large business with direct responsibility, to managerial, managers running complex corporations with the separation of ownership and management. And that's really important when we talk about our worker history, that the value of the corporation and what Alfred was trying to pitch was through managers running the show. So with this boom, there's this increased investment in managers during these big waves of business changing. So job security. I know when I think of my parents or my grandparents' access to work, you're working at the same company your entire life, you're locked in. And they're really calling the shots. There's worker autonomy, there's empowerment, because it's not all about the stocks. It's about the managers making these decisions. And I can't help what I'm thinking about. Do you all know Corporate Aaron?
Love
This
Corporate Aaron.
satirical.
Yeah.
Thank you. So Corporate Aaron, her title, the award-winning manager for the managerial logistics of management at management. Literally what we're talking about. Another good one for the show notes, but thank you for your service, Aaron. We should have you on the show sometime. That would be hilarious. So we have this theory of work that's prevalent in the US. And what's really interesting about this story is that Alfred's work came out in the 1970s. And those were not a good time for business in the US. We had the oil shock, this oil crisis, mixed up with Iran, which was a big part of the history we're still navigating today, caused a huge inflation spike. The US became less globally competitive as a manufacturer compared to Japan and Germany. And companies were saturated by over-diversification. So managers at McManagement were making all these decisions that ultimately just saturated corporate business. And the managers weren't doing what shareholders wanted. So growth was not growthing, and there was an opportunity for influence to happen. And that influence landed when Milton Friedman, an economist who was a professor at University of Chicago, wrote an article for the New York Times in 1970. And it was called "The Social Responsibility of Business is to Increase Its Profits." And Milton said, there is one and only one social responsibility of business: to use its resources and engage in activities designed to increase its profits, so long as it stays within the rules of the game, which is to say, engages in open and free competition without deception or fraud. You will probably be not surprised to hear that he became the economic advisor of Ronald Reagan. Insert Reaganomics. So free the markets, less government regulation, let it rip. And with this, Milton was also critiquing this managerial capitalism, where you have managers who have a lot of power and autonomy making decisions based off of their own interests, in theory, the interests of the people. And he advocated for business to be all about shareholder interest, called the shareholder primacy doctrine, which just sounds evil. I don't know. It's just, wow.
It's
There's
like,
a lot to say.
well,
Yeah, go
it's
ahead.
like when I hear the words shareholder primacy doctrine, in Star Trek Discovery, the season where they get sent to a different alternate universe, where Michelle Yeoh's character is this like really terrible, mean queen. And it's like high competition society and anybody can kill anybody else. Like that is the visual that comes to my mind, is that alternate universe where it's like competition above anything else,
Mhm.
right? And a highly authoritarian.
Mhm. Well, and it just based on the assumption that everybody starts at the same place with the same set of tools.
It's not sounding good. It's not sounding good for the collective. I'll tell you that. And there's really a lot to say about this guy Milton and his time with Reagan. One side note I'll say is that apparently one of the things that he influenced was removing the solar panels from the White House, which were actually put up by President Carter, which is like pretty impressive for that time period. And the point of it was to symbolize anti-environment regulation. So that's what we're working with. And just to kind of close this portion out, coming back to Daddy No Cap, Adam Smith, through Milton's push that the shareholder was king, we basically morphed from this decentralized but regulated, in theory, advancing society driven by our ethical self-interests to a monopolistic, deregulated society driven by shareholder self-interest. And if it's done ethically, I'm using quotations, that it would be good for the world. And that was Milton's take on the invisible hand. And Aparna, I know, like from your vantage point, this is also woven into how we got to consumer capitalism as well.
Oof. Well, so as I have been digging more into the history of just work and production in the United States, the thing that I can't get over is this really intense shift that we made from producing the things that people need. People need roads, people need trash cans, people need homes. Obviously, people need food, good shoes, to just a bunch of shit that nobody needs. And there's one company, Lars, I was complaining about them last week, right? It's this like deodorizer brand called Zuna. And in all of their commercials, they're like, get a Zuna because you don't have to smell mildew and mold in your house. And every time that ad pops up in my socials, I'm like, my dude, you should probably clean your house. Like, you should probably address the mold and the mildew rather than buying this $30 deodorizer so you don't smell it anymore. What bizarre, like, it's just so bizarre to me, right? And also, as somebody who is a little bit of a girly girl now in her 40s, all of the makeup brands. I'm like, I don't know. Like, do we need one more South Asian lipstick brand? Do we need one more Latina eyeshadow brand? Right. Like, I mean, there's a saturation in the market of just so much crap. And it really does coincide in this like 50s through the 70s timeframe when Chandler and Milton are theorizing about how industry should function.
Truly. I think you've said before, outsourcing the basics and producing essentially knowledge and junk. And that's really stuck with me. And that's, yeah, like how are you a manager within that context too? So what do we get from this shareholder primacy doctrine? Well, you might be able to guess that the stock market did really well. So under Reagan's presidency, the Dow Jones more than tripled. The stock market became very important. And yet we saw a decline in the middle class, massive cuts in social services. This is where the platform of the welfare queen came through. Labor protections were weakened that were supporting working class people, and the national debt tripled. So shareholder became king. And this is also when shareholder activists started to become a thing. The wealth gap absolutely solidified in a whole other level. And this is the model that we're still using today. This is it. This is where we're at. And I know, Bachul, you've been, as someone who's been in financial services, management consulting, private equity, you've been interested in tracking alternative models that really do benefit all workers. I'm curious what's been on your mind lately with this.
Yeah. So I think, one thing for me is watching, you hear people talk about a K-shaped economy, right? Well, the K-shaped economy is only further supported by K-shaped compensation structures within organizations. And then that gets back to like the value that a worker brings. And so, you have these organizations where at the top, you have all of these people who are paid increasingly outsized, 30, 50, 100x their lowest paid employee. The CEO is getting paid that much. And that K has just gone like this year over year. When any leadership advisor or any organizational advisor will tell you that uh, the best way to have a company thrive is to have the employees feel like they're playing with house money, is how they put it. So what's been, what really gets me going is when I hear stories like this organization called Ownership Works, and they've gotten some pretty high-powered support from the head at KKR, a huge private equity investment firm. And ultimately, what Ownership Works is doing is they're going around and working with all these investment firms, and they're saying, okay, great, you want to work with owners and buy businesses and do whatever. But what we're going to do is make this a win-win for everybody so that all of the employees at these portfolio companies will get something and they'll feel invested in getting, achieving the deal thesis and getting the company sold at that valuation, because now they're going to get a piece of it too. And I think that's when you think about the systems and structures, um, there is value in having the bulk of the population struggling to have enough, let alone to have a little bit of extra. Any extra the working class have is leverage for them to make different choices in their employment. And then you think about the tie to health insurance, and you think about the tie to retirement. And ultimately, you've got this very small portion of the population that now has control over the business aspect of your access and opportunity. And then through lobbying, they have access to the government as well. And the government and the policies and procedures they do. So there's a lot of things that need to happen. But when I see things like Ownership Works, when I hear stories like a friend of mine told me that her dad worked for this guy for the last 40 years, the guy went to sell his company, and the dad thought, her dad thought, okay, that's great. I'm retiring, I guess. The guy gave him a check for a percentage of the sale because he was like, I wouldn't have built this company without you. And I think that's what I want to see more of. I want to see more of people in the top floors of the offices realizing that in one check, they can change a family's trajectory multi-generationally if they just realize that the value of what that person is doing is greater than what they've targeted it with a pay band. What I appreciate about the two of you is we're coming at this from a look. This is messed up, but we're not trying to judge anybody or shame anybody. This is like the product of year over year over year of one very small segment of the population in putting all these systems in place. to maintain that control and authority. And what are they control? I think they're controlling the definition of value. So once we can reclaim how to define and how to value, like true valuations, not, you live in the Pacific Northwest, I live in the Bay, we live in the Bay Area, seeing a home that isn't worth more than $350,000 selling for
$2 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I think you should speak for yourself, because I do find myself judging people making these choices. I do. And I think what's really hard for me is, like, I've been so justice oriented even as a little kid. And Bachul, I also grew up in India, right? And I would see, like, even as a child, I saw that, and like, especially the gender inequities play out in families, in all of our families, right? Like, nobody's exempt from it. Um, and I really have, as I've become an adult, I've really tried to hold the nuance with me. There's so much sort of brainwashing that has happened from 60 years of these economic policies, and the brainwashing and sort of tying our worth to what we generate for somebody else, right? It's never the measure of like how healthy we are, or like how much we love our kids, or how well we care for our neighbors. It's like, how much can I produce for fill in the blank corporation? And I also think that that's true in nonprofits. That's also true in philanthropy, right? Like, these corporate ways of working have totally permeated these like social impact sectors as well. Right. So holding that, but then just really struggling with the idea that a really small percentage of the population feels good or comfortable in being complicit in wealth inequity. And right. So you live in the Bay and I live in Seattle, and we have actually seen the impact of what tech companies have done to our cities in the last 15 years, with the rise of homelessness, with, challenges sourcing teachers, because the teacher salaries in no way, shape, or form are like compensating individuals to pay $5,000 a month for one-bedroom apartments, right? Or two-bedroom, 1,200 square foot homes that are going for $2 million. And that's insane. Like, teachers aren't getting paid that, right? And so it's creating labor challenges as well. And so, yeah, I really struggle to hold that.
I think what both of you are saying that's really hitting me is we are white collar workers, a small part of this population. We are a small percentage of this population, in particularly where the wealth is being held. And that recognition too of kind of waking up to where do we sit in comparison to the rest of the population, and pulling ourselves out of that auto drive of also assuming that everybody thinks that this is what productivity looks like. Everybody thinks that this is the type of self-worth that we should be getting after. This class isolation is another big piece that I hope that we support breaking in this podcast, and something that is something that I personally come back to as an edge for myself, having this 15-year career. So yeah, really with you both on that. So, and I think you're getting to exactly where we're headed, which is the question of where does this history show up today? And what really have we inherited? And I want to talk about, again, the 1970s is when we first heard the term burnout begin to be used. And it was first used by this American psychologist named Dr. Hubert Freudenberger. And he first came up with this language in observing volunteers at, oh, did I say it wrong?
No, but thank you, Germans.
Right.
Could be Swiss.
I think
Should find out.
I'm 90% sure he's German. The Freud, the legacy. Well, he did good work. Shout out to Freudenberger. He came up with this language. He was observing volunteers at the St. Mark's Free Clinic in the East Village in New York. And that clinic was supporting addicts and people who were houseless. And it turned into this official analysis of people in social services at large and focused on young people who wanted to help people and were emotionally depleted by the work. And then the term got picked up by a psychologist named Christina Maslach at UC Berkeley. And she created the Maslach Burnout Inventory, MBI, in 1981. And I'm curious if these words resonate with you too. The model analyzes 1, emotional exhaustion, 2, depersonalization, and 3, reduced personal accomplishment. Feels pretty important when we talk about the shareholder primacy model. Is this relevant?
Yes, 100%. This is relevant. I think, think about it this way. So this is the ethos that I was told about work. You have to get in before your boss. You can't leave until your boss has left. Even if you're doing nothing, you were supposed to stay at your desk until your boss left, and then you can leave. They call that FaceTime, right? So so you can see your face still there, right? In all of my careers, early careers, I can't remember a single vacation in which I didn't do some work or take some meetings, right? And, I'll give you a great example of this. When my sister relocated from Los Angeles to Amsterdam, they had to tell her, like, hey, you need to take vacation. Like, you need to take vacation, and it's August. Stop coming to the office every day. Because in Europe, August is like vacation, and it was now she's adjusted, and she's like, she doesn't understand how she ever went through what we put people through in the US. And then to tie it back to what you said earlier, because they throw money at certain roles, there's always someone to replace you. So I think a couple of things broke down. The biggest thing for me that broke down was when CEOs started getting rewarded for layoffs. The other thing I would say is that after 2008, why there wasn't a broader investigation into the weird back invisible strings behind Wall Street, corporate earnings, et cetera, retirement accounts, So it's look, I'm all for innovation and making money. I just feel like at some point along the way, we decided that it was going to be either you're joining this train to capitalism or you're going under it. And I just feel like we all could have coexisted. And so the one of the nastiest tools and nastiest things they've done to us as a people, or mostly, majority people, is give them a scarcity mindset.
So, Bachul, you worked in industries with fairly high compensation. I came up in the nonprofit, social sector, education, and even in those places where my very first salary was $27,000 a year in 2006. And I can tell you that that was not really enough money to live off of, even in 2006. But burnout was a sign or like a badge of achievement, even coming up in the nonprofit sector, where like, are you so exhausted? Like, how exhausted are you? You're working so hard, and by the way, there's like tons of wage theft happening by your employers as well, because you're non-exempt employee, but you're working 60 hours a week, and nobody's paying you the overtime that it takes to like make programs successful, and so I just feel like, and that's what when I say like corporatism has entered other sectors as well, it's like Sure, you're paying me pennies. I'm actually living in poverty in the similar conditions to the people who I'm supposed to be helping. And I also like experience this intense exhaustion.
But that's where the manager class comes in. So they throw the money at the managers
Yeah.
to push down on everybody else. And as an immigrant and an immigrant who I basically had to suss out how to make the most money I could to support my family. So we have there's different. So even within this world where all these people are getting paid a lot of money, you get different snippets of why people are there and why people are sort of in these careers. And for me, it was just a matter of survival. But before I've worked, gosh, if I sat down and actually tried to list out every job I've ever had. I've worked on a farm. I've been a bartender, a barback, a short order cook, but in every job I've had, whether it's frontline, retail, this service, this thing, there is that concept somehow of more is better, whether it's overtime, whether it's being available for that Sunday shift, working the holiday shift, and you get that reward. You get that dopamine fix of good worker. And so there, whether it's money, whether it's whatever, competition or fear now, mostly, I think the latest thing is AI. And trust me, as someone who's done quite a bit of research into AI, what AI is not taking your jobs anytime soon. Trust me, I have some hilarious AI stories to tell you, but um, that's the new fear. So carrot stick, that's the new stick.
Hmm.
If you don't do all of this and more for less, robot's going to take your job.
Wow. Yes, there's a lot to talk about with AI. And I think that the dangling of the carrot is a really, really interesting analysis. And I think that's, the World Health Organization added burnout as an occupational phenomenon within chronic workplace stress in 2019. 76% of employees experience burnout at least sometimes, which means that it's cyclical. And that's what has been measured. So it's really this chronic category that exists for workers. And the irony is, if we are trying to fit this in the business utopia dream of shareholder equals better for all, a Gallup 2024 study found that burnout impacts $438 billion in lost productivity globally. That's the GDP of a mid-size economy. And so what is this new invisible hand really up to these days? What's actually happening? That's the question we need to be asking and what we're doing together. And if we're coming back to this visible hand of the manager, and you both were getting at this, most burnout factors can go back to the manager's behavior. Unfair treatment, unmanageable workloads, unclear communication, lack of support, unreasonable time pressure. And as we're saying, within the system of shareholder supremacy, and what many of us have experienced probably personally or just witness, the manager is not empowered in this system either. There's the performance of manager. So we're in these layers of bureaucracy serving the bottom line. And, what we're trying to ask here is, what do we do about it? And so that is the point of today and wraps up our storytelling hour and hopefully gives you a little bit of context of our history, our white collar history. And as I said at the beginning of the show, we want to tell our story so we can make new choices and share with each other. There are so many different ways to contribute in this world and be in this world, to Bachul's point. And this podcast hopes to create more caring choice for all of us.
Okay. So we close out every episode the same way. We're going to try to do that anyways, which is one takeaway from each of us and one thing that you can actually do this week. So we have our history that helps us understand that we didn't get here out of nowhere, and also that we've only gotten here in the last 50 to 60 years, and we can influence change. Burnout is just one of the factors and one of the challenges that white collar workers face. And we have to find a way forward, because one of the things that burnout does is that actually makes you physically ill as well. And so, Bachul, I'm curious, what's one takeaway for the listeners and maybe a thing that you suggest they do?
Yeah, I'll tell you, it's actually the advice I've been giving. I have a couple of mentees, and it's the advice I give them now. The world is never going to define enough. You've talked about this concept of maximizing shareholder value. For me, the part that's missing is at what cost, right? And so we're going to maximize until we're maximizing the maximizing, right? And so I think for me, my advice to all of you is you need to figure out, what does a beautiful life look like to you? And how much is it going to cost to support that life? And ultimately calculate what is your enough. Because if your markers for success are external to your own body, you're never going to win.
Just that, Okay, find out what is your enough. Lars, what do you have for us?
Wow. My takeaway from this is surprisingly feeling empathy towards this absolute mess of a circumstance that we put managers in. And I'm going to sit with that a little bit more, because I can also feel a lot of anger there. So thank you both for widening the lens as we sat with that history. And I said this in our last episode, to get lunch with your coworker and ask them what they care about. And I'm going to actually keep going to that. The basics, talk to your coworker. It literally is everything, and not from a place of just complaining about the conditions, although that can be nice sometimes, but really understanding each other so we can support each other, so we can make new moves. To Bachul's point, how we can help each other understand what is enough. So this week, if you work for a company that is driven by shareholder value, ask your coworker how they feel about it. Have they thought about it before? Would they want it to be different? What would that be like? Just spend some time in curiosity, share a little bit with what you learned, and see what comes up.
I love that. Okay, I'm going to offer the employee primacy doctrine.
Hey.
And under the employee primacy doctrine, you get to put a 2-hour block on your calendar for a made up meeting, and then use that time to take a nap, go do a workout, eat a long lunch, whatever it is that you need to do. This is the employee primacy doctrine. You just get to take care of yourself, and encourage everybody to do that. And with that, Bachul, thank you for joining us. If you are willing to stay with us for a couple more minutes, I want to read something that was shared from somebody in our listening community. So are you up for that?
Yeah, yeah,
Okay.
yeah.
Okay. So this person says, I'm hopeful that corporate work can evolve from extraction to stewardship, from short-term profit obsession to long-term human survival. I'm hopeful that we can design systems that value collective care, dignity, and access. I'm hopeful for companies that see themselves as builders of society, not just products. On a more personal level, I'm hopeful I get to live long enough to see even a blink of that shift. And if not, I want to do whatever small part I can to help educate, nurture, and support the next generation to think differently, to design differently. In the meantime, I work within these systems. I want to support my family. I want to work with kind, values driven people. I want to contribute to something that's not actively destroying the planet or hollowing out communities. VC backed companies, monopolies, and the techno feudal structures are not sustainable. We know that. I don't want to just optimize the current machine. I want us to question that machine. That's the hope, that we redesign it before it redesigns us.
Woo.
Wow.
Thank you so much to our listeners who are letting us know how they're feeling. And Bachul, thank you for being with us today.
Thanks for having me. It's a great conversation to be a part of.
Okay, friends. So, on our next episode, we're going to be exploring a very common feeling in white collar work, which is the fear of losing it all. We are going to talk about the scarcity of losing our status and the real cost behind feeling that way.
And Circle Back Club, that's all of you. We want to hear from you. We are collecting stories from workers who are sharing their icks and their hopes for corporate work. We will weave them throughout our shows in hopes of building a community where you know you're not alone. So if you have a story about work and you want to tell it to us, send us an email or audio recording at hello@. We'll see you next week. This is the Circle Back Club.